This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host for this week's episode, Paul Jasley, filling in for the immortal Mike Rappin. But I'm not alone, of course. I'm joined by two wonderful people to talk about comics with, Kait Lamphere.
Hi.
And Kara Shamborski.
Hello.
It's good to have you both here. We are very quickly, almost too quickly to believe, heading toward the holiday season. So we have a great episode about that today. But before we get to the main topic, I want to ask the questions I am legally obligated as host to ask for every episode. How have you been? How have the comics been? Let's start with you, Kara.
I have a slight cold, which is tragic to me because I have made it so far into the school year without getting anything from any of the tiny children. That's impressive. So to be so close to Christmas break and to now have the sniffles, I'm like, oh no, knock it out of your system, Kara. You don't have to live like this. In terms of how have comics been? I'm obviously super excited that Brian and I are continuing with our I Read Star Wars comic books special, our weekly gift to our fellow Star Wars / comic nerds. At the center of that Venn diagram, you will find us getting way too excited about Star Wars in yet another medium. This week, I read a comic that has been on my list for I think 2 years now. 2 years ago it came out, where I kept being like, I'm obviously going to like this. I know I'm going to read this eventually, and I just never did. But luckily, Motor Crush is on Hoopla, so that did finally happen, where I was like, I haven't used any of my December pulls yet. Let's finally dig into Motor Crush. So I read the first issue, and this is a series that is done by the creative team that did that Batgirl reboot a few years ago, where she's got her yellow Doc Martens and is in the Gotham equivalent of, I guess, Bushwick in New York. It's Brendan Fletcher, Babs Tarr, and Cameron Stewart. And this book is definitely designed to play to Babs Tarr's aesthetic strengths. She's very almost kind of like a modern pinup situation in how she draws women. And I think dudes are kind of her afterthought, where she's like, I can draw them, but I'm really here to show you some lips and hips. So, which is great, but it's I was definitely reading this book and I was like, And not even that I'm saying that the women are over sexualized. It's just she definitely takes the time to give them a sensual edge, even if they're a hard ass in a biker gang. So Motor Crush, the first issue kind of introduces you to this world where it's slight alternate reality, near future situation where you're like, okay, a lot of things seem familiar, but this feels like maybe 20 to 40 years in the future from where we are now. Mm-hmm. So their action is centered around these motor bike races, this racing circuit. And our heroine of the first issue, we see her racing on this circuit. We kind of meet her dad, who is a former racer, get a sense of her situation as a character. Then we the second half of the issue has a tonal shift where you see actually she's an up-and-coming racer in the legit circuit, but she is crushing it on the illicit circuit where you race for drugs, which are called something like Crusher, hence my terrible pun right there. But so she races to get these drugs, and these drugs make you go faster, but obviously there's you get addicted to them, and we actually see someone getting I'm gonna go with murdered by this drug, what would you call a warning kill, an exhibition kill, where you kill someone in front of a crowd of people to be this might happen to you too, kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
Execution style. Yeah. So the person running this shady race says, we caught this guy stealing our stash, let's give it to him, and they pour a whole thing of this one drug down his mouth, and he just straight up explodes. His body is just a pile of goop on the ground, and I was like, what?
Ooh.
this is not the book I thought I would be reading. Like, everything is really like fuchsia and neon and like shiny screens and everything, but there's a pretty dark underbelly, guys. And the last issue, the first issue, ends on such a bleak note that I'm kind of like, do I want to continue? Like, I kind of want to continue, like, aesthetically, and I do like this creative team, but this is way darker than I thought. I thought this was going to be like fun motorcycle girl gang situation, like Betty and Veronica Vixens over at Archie, or the work that I think almost this exact creative team, or like no. Do you remember the Black Canary book from a few years ago that kind of looks like this, but I think is Veronica Fish doing the art?
That
maybe
sounds right.
Yeah. So like that kind of aesthetic where she was also sort of in a biker gang, like. There's like a certain subset of like lady creators in comics who all of a sudden, like a couple years ago, were like, everything is a shiny, sexy girl gang. And I'm like, okay, but can you all not do the same thing at the same time? Because now everything is a sexy motorcycle girl gang. Like, yeah. Anyway,
I will say I am a noted fan of girl gang comics, and I did pick this issue up. I remember reading this first issue, and I think I had a similar reaction where I didn't go back for issue 2 because the tonal shift at the end. But I'd be curious now that's free on Hoopla to go back and revisit it. I might like it more. But yeah, what stands out to me is Babs Tarr's artwork. The color is fantastic. I love that like bright fuchsia that they use for a lot of the books. So. Yeah, might have to revisit this one.
It looks fantastic. They've got great world building. I think Tar does better action sequences in this than she was doing in Batgirl, which makes sense because this was, I think, post Batgirl, so she'd had some practice. But overall, I was kind of like, ooh, this is dark. I don't know if I wanted dark necessarily.
I want that, like, a West Side Story girl gang, not necessarily like the dark, scary girl gang, right?
Yeah, like let more pink ladies than
right.
Like if Furiosa had a girl gang,
Right. I'm sure there's an analogy somewhere, but yeah. What was the girl gang from the Warriors? Was that I'm blanking now. A listener will remember and let us know on Twitter, please. What was the name of the girl gang in the Warriors? Thanks. Kait, what did you read this week?
I read the I Am a Hero omnibus, which I kept remembering as I Am Hero. Like, I thought the guy's name was going to be Hero. But anyway, this is by Kengo Hanazawa, and it was James's pick for the 2019 Goodreads Reading Challenge. I'm super behind on this reading challenge. I don't think I'm going to be able to read like the 10 books that I have left between now and the new year, but I'm trying really hard. Anyway, this was a very long manga. It's definitely an omnibus. It deserves that name. But it was also, it ended up being a zombie story. And the combination of these two things, it being very long and also about zombies, meant that it was engaging, but also that I was reading it until like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which is peak creepy time. And the art with the zombies is creepy enough that it's a little bit like The Ring. Like, it's extra scary because of the visuals. No. So the art was good, just not for 3 a.m. But along with being a zombie story, this was also kind of, I felt like it was a medium for the creator to kind of talk about his philosophies about manga, because that's a lot of what the first part of the story was about, was just this: the protagonist is a manga creator and he's talking to his coworkers and his girlfriend about what manga is to their culture and what makes a manga great. And it was really interesting, but at times it got a little bit preachy, I felt like. And then suddenly there are zombies. So
okay.
It was kind of a cool combination, but also it felt a little directionless up until it turned into a zombie book. So I am interested in continuing. Like, I want to know what happens next because it ends on a cliffhanger, but it is just like, it's a little bit unusual. It's an unusual combination of things. So.
Sounds interesting. I like the idea of using zombies as a sort of metatextual device. No zombie stories are really about zombies. They're about, larger issue, I think. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Paul,
yes.
This week, did you also read a book with an unexpected and abrupt mood shift?
I did actually. Yes, I read.
We did not plan this, friends.
Yeah, that's very funny. I read The Hard Tomorrow, which was an OGN by Eleanor Davis. It was published by Drawn and Quarterly last month, so it just recently came out. And it got a lot of advance buzz. I remember hearing about it from a couple different sources. So I picked it up at the shop kind of on a whim. And it's a stunning book. It might be the best comic I've read this year. I know there's that thing of like reading the most recent thing you read you love the most, but really it's a fantastic book. And it's basically set in a near future or, a world very similar to ours. It's about a woman named Hannah who is part of an anti-violence activist group, sort of like an Antifa sort of, or Antifa, however you pronounce it, collective, fighting against or protesting against the use of chemical weapons. At the same time, she's trying to build a house off the grid with her husband. They're trying to start a family, have a child. And it's basically a meditation on the balance between the seeming pessimism and futility of that activism and the optimism that drives it. The hope for a better world versus the terribleness of the world that you actually live in. And it's really a balance between those two. It does have a very shocking ending moment toward the end involving her husband. I don't want to give anything away. But really the star of the book for me is the way Davis illustrates it. Her line work is very fluid. It's sensuous has maybe an odd connotation, but it does have a fluidity to it that's very evocative. It's all black and white. She does some amazing narrative work in this, some panels that I had to stop reading just to absorb it all. It is a truly stunning book, and I don't want to give too much away, but if you want to read something that's unique and different and feels like an important statement, this is the book for you. I highly, highly recommend it.
Would you say that this is a book for someone who is already familiar with the comic medium, or would you feel comfortable giving this to someone who normally reads prose?
I would say you kind of have to maybe already be a comic fan. This might be a hard sell just because her artwork does look simplistic at first. I think having an appreciation or background in the nuances of cartooning would definitely help. That makes sense?
Okay.
Because, it is a very beautiful book, but I think it looks simple at first, but once you kind of are familiar with, the storytelling techniques, maybe if someone, again, reads Understanding Comics and then comes to this, they'd be able to see what all of the amazing behind the scenes stuff that Davis is doing artistically, if that makes sense.
I ask because I still have no idea what to get my brother for Christmas, so I'm fishing for ideas.
Okay, well, I would say maybe give it a flip through. Maybe just judge if their taste and their style. Artistically, that might be a good book. I think it's a fantastic book. I would buy it for yourself because I loved it so much. But
high
anyway.
praise, Paul.
Yes, I also read a Batman comic. I can't leave without talking about Batman since I'm the host. I read Batman Creature of the Night #4. I do want to mention this book because this is a fantastic miniseries, the 4-issue miniseries. The first issue came out way back in November of 2017, so it's been a 2-year-long wait for the story to end, and it's been worth every minute. This is Kurt Busiek writing, art by John Paul Leon. I don't want to speculate too much, but I believe Leon had some serious health issues, which has caused the delay, but I'm very glad that they let him finish the book because it's all about his artwork. It's such a beautiful-looking book. And if you don't remember, I think I talked about the first issue 2 years ago on the show. But the gimmick here is that it's basically a semi-sequel to the book that Busiek did with Stuart Immonen called Superman Secret Identity, where it's a Superman story set in our world where Superman only exists as a fictional character. This is a similar story involving Batman. It follows a young boy named Bruce Wainwright who lives in Boston. He loves Batman. He loves the Adam West TV show. He collects Batman comics. He's obsessed with Batman, the fictional character. And then after his parents are killed by a mugger, he begins hallucinating this dark creature of the night that is taking revenge on people that have wronged him. So the book is basically a quote real world example of how Batman would operate in the real world. And by this issue of Bruce Wainwright as an adult, he's the head of the company that he inherited from his parents. It's, the same story as Bruce Wayne, but this time it appears that the demonic bat-like creature that's avenging for him might be a figment of his imagination, or it's something that's possessed his personality, and he's trying to make sense of all this. it's a meditation on how we process grief. It's an exploration of how we make sense of violence. It's all the stuff you want from a Batman story, but it's really rooted in a sort of real appreciation for what the character means as a fictional character, right? So
nice.
And as I mentioned, Leon's artwork is beautiful. It's such a good-looking book. Do yourself a favor. Whenever the collection comes out, I'm sure it'll be out soon, flip through it. It's a fantastic Batman comic. If you want a standalone Batman comic, this might be a book I'd recommend to someone who likes, never reads comics, but is interested in Batman. This is the book for you. So,
good sell, Paul.
Oh, thanks. I'm trying. All right, so that's what we read this week. Of course, there's more comic books coming out this week on December 11th already. Kait, what are you excited to read this week?
I'm excited to read Firefly Unification War Volume 2. I've been talking about Firefly a lot lately on this show. I'm so glad that Boom picked it up. This is by Greg Pak, Dan McDade, and Lee Garbett. And there are a lot of things that I want for our planet, but for what I want for our verse is just more Firefly. This covers some of the backstory that's mentioned on the original TV show. So in fact, it focuses just on Mal and Zoe. And Volume 1 is already out. And also they've released The Sting, which focuses just on all of the ladies that we met on the show. And I'm so excited to read that one. I picked it up, and I haven't read it yet, but maybe next weekend I'll just sit down and read all of the new Firefly.
So, Kait, would you recommend this book to someone who's maybe never seen the show or didn't like the show? I'm asking for a friend. That's me.
That's a really good question. I'm wondering if The Sting might be a better place to start with, because it seems like it's going to be a one-off story.
Okay, I see.
But let me read it and get back to you about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because this is an amazing creative team, and I'm really interested in reading it because of that. But I tried the show and it just wasn't for me. But I can't beat Dan McDade on art and Greg Pak writing. That sounds great. So
yeah, I'll probably reread all of it once Volume 2 comes out. At least all of the Boom stuff. So
gotcha.
I can be thinking about that while I'm reading it and get back to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Kara, how about you? What are you excited for?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm really hyped about this I Read Star Wars comic book special that we're doing. And next week, actually, the show is going to be a spotlight on Dr. Aphra, who is a Star Wars comics native character that was introduced in the Darth Vader series and was so popular that she got her own series that is now on its 6th trade coming out. Okay. It's been going for a while. And so Brian and I were talking about volumes 1 through 5 for the episode that we recorded. And I got to the end and I started talking on the show to Brian about how and I can't, and this is a great place for it to end. And he was like, what are you talking about? It's still ongoing. And I was like, oh, that seems like a basic piece of knowledge I should have had, right? So my comic pick for the week of December 11th is Star Wars Dr. Aphra number 40. I have been going through the trades on this, but now I'm wondering if that's a mistake, because the solicit for this one says that Darth Vader is catching up to Dr. Aphra, and I just need her to be okay, because she's a terrible person who brings me joy, and I just need everything to be fine for her. And you guys know how I feel about Darth Vader. I'm such trash when it comes to Anakin. I hate San Skywalker, but I really need him to not get his way in this. I understand. I have anxiety about this fictional character, even though I'm easily 6 to 8 issues behind on what she's actually up to. But I'm she's survived this far. She could still do it. But the title for this storyline that number 40 is at the middle or at the end of is A Rogue's End, and I'm don't do that, don't do that. So I'm emotionally invested.
I have to get on this. I've been a bad Star Wars fan. I've not read any of this recent Marvel Star Wars stuff, but this sounds like the most appealing series. That might be the one I have to jump on and check out.
Paul,
so.
you should listen to our I Read Star Wars comic book special.
I
that way you
should.
could either read along with it or just be like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to get full spoilers and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to go back and actually get into.
Yeah, either way. So, yes, I will have to do that. I'm in full Star Wars geek mode with the new film coming out, so I'm in the right mindset to do that. So
excellent.
I'll make it so, yeah. As for my pick this week, I'm going to pick Far Sector number 2. This is the second issue of a 12-issue limited series that DC is doing. I can't remember which imprint it might be the Young Animal imprint. I can't remember exactly, but it's basically a Green Lantern story. It's written by N.K. Jemisin and with art by Jamal Campbell. It's about a Green Lantern, a rookie Green Lantern named Sojourner Mullen, and she's investigating a murder in a giant megapolis, a mega city out somewhere in the distant far sectors of space, hence the title. There's a murder in this city, and it turns out it's the first homicide that's taken place in this city in 500 years because the different alien races that inhabit this city have all somehow like tampen down their emotions, so there's not really any type of conflict there. So this series is picking up a murder mystery where no one actually knows how to investigate a murder. So it's a Green Lantern's job to kind of figure it out and take charge, but she's a rookie, still kind of learning the ropes. It's exactly what you want from a Green Lantern story. It's part science fiction, it's part police procedural, and Hal Jordan's not in it. So it's basically a perfect Green Lantern story.
Ouch.
In my eyes.
What do you have against Hal?
No, I'm just kidding. He's kind of a...
Is it because he's such a cop? I mean, like, no, like, I don't... Okay, that was not the right thing to say, but like...
I know what you're saying.
He's such a cop.
Yeah.
And like...
Yeah.
So if you are not... And like, when I say he's such a cop, I mean like, you don't want him at a party with you because he's the guy who's like, sir, are you old enough to be drinking that beer? Which, like, is the job, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be upholding the law, but, like, you don't want Hal Jordan at your party. Unless he's co-hosting with Barry Allen, because I feel like Barry can bring out that side of Hal where he's just like, okay, maybe just this once I'll maybe bend the rule, it'll be fine. But yeah, Kyle Rayner is the funner Green Lantern.
Exactly. I think being a kid when Kyle Rayner was introduced, and that being kind of the first Green Lantern stuff I read, I've always kind of resented Hal Jordan coming back from the dead. It's like, man, we had a great Green Lantern without you. Why'd you have to come back? So, anyway, this is a really good series. If you like the Green Lantern mythos, but maybe aren't up to date with the current Green Lantern story or the series, this would be a book to check out. The artwork is lovely. It's got a lot of futuristic sci-fi stuff if you're into that stuff. So, it's a really interesting series. I'm excited to see where it goes. So, with that said, we are going to be taking a quick break here, but when we return, our theme for this episode is our comic book gift giving guide. What books do you give to the people on your Christmas shopping list? We'll be back shortly to discuss that. Well, I'm looking at the calendar right now, and Christmas is very quickly approaching. It's a little nerve-wracking thinking about who I have to buy gifts for, but comics make great gifts, and Kara, you have already mentioned you have a gift-giving dilemma, so we figured we'd get together and talk about how do we give comics, or what comics do we give to the people in our lives. Do you want to maybe start here and maybe talk about your gift-giving anxiety? Yes.
My struggle. Okay, so my struggle is, as I'm sure you and many of our listeners identify with this, since I love comics, that's my like instinct as a gift, because I'm like, but I love the thing, and therefore might you also love the thing if I make sure that the comic I choose is within your genre interests for film and television. But like I've come to a point where like I've tried to give comics to family members and friends, and like sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. I try so hard with my mom, but she just doesn't have the like, she's just not a person that like sits. And when she does, she's like, and now I'm asleep. So it's like, so like I have given her some comics over the years to be like, Mom, you have to read this. But like actually the one time she did ask if she could read something is when I was showing her the Kevin Keller trades I had from Archie Comics. Okay. She was like, "Oh, I heard about that. Can I read that?" And I was like, "Sure," but it's been like sitting in her bathroom for about a year now, so I don't know if she's actually cracked it open or not. But yeah. So I was talking about like, "Oh, Paul, that book you read, maybe that's the thing I can get for my brother," which I can say because I don't think he listens to the show when I'm on it. But but yeah, like I've given him some comics before and he's given me some comics before. Like it's not his go-to medium, but if there's something where it's like it's in his interest in general, he'll give it a whirl.
Well, I think that's interesting because, you know, it might be a little bit self-serving in some regards, saying, here, I love comic books, therefore I want everyone else to love comics. But if someone's not a normal comic book reader and you kind of take the time to think, well, here's something that they don't know exists that they might like based on their taste, that shows a little like, you know, some nice thinking. It's the, you know, the thought that counts, as they say. So I like that idea.
Yeah. And then my mom texted me the other day because she's getting presents for our younger relatives that we like maybe have only seen a couple times in their whole lives, kind of thing. Because like, you know, people live far away and travel's expensive. But so she texted me. She's just like, "What Star Wars books do I get for children under the age of 10?" And I'm like, "What?" Like that's actually pretty broad, Mom. Like, did you have a narrower scope in mind? But it just got me thinking how, like, yeah, for people who are like, "Oh God, I've got like a niece and a nephew and I've got like a second cousin and I should probably bring something, but I don't know what." Like, I do think comics are a great gift because like that's a way to get kids reading, like even if they're not strong readers in school. I find like working in a school, I find generally if you hand a kid a comic book, they're gonna devour it because even if they can't get through all the words or syntax, they're going to be able to follow along with the pictures.
Exactly. And again, it might be self-serving, but if you get kids addicted to comics, that gives us more listeners in the future. It makes perfect sense. So.
Playing the long game here.
But I like that idea. I do like the idea of giving kids comics. So you have a few, we have a whole list here of stuff, different people in your life. So do you want to maybe run through some different age groups and what you might recommend?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and for kids at like the more like elementary school reader level, like maybe not like third grade and below. It depends on their level of reading. Because like when I was in third grade, I was just starting to read chapter books. Some kids don't read those until later. Like I think you should know your audience to that level, but like I see the kids at the school where I work reading like Raina Telgemeier's works.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Like Guts and what's the other ones?
Smile and Sisters.
I mean, those are wildly popular books. I'd be surprised if they haven't already heard of them, you know, before you give it to them.
Right. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's not a good pick, or if they've already read them, because again, popular, and they're published by Scholastic, so they definitely seen them at Scholastic book fairs. I also like the book Amulet, which is kind of like children going on an adventure. There's like a secret world under the family house, and they start discovering it. It's like maybe a little more advanced, but again, like, you know, if your kid can handle the Brave Little Toaster or whatever it is the kids are watching these days with like adventure stuff, like, yeah, sometimes adventures are scary, but like you can do it. Something that I have at the elementary level, but I think actually is more of, I would safely call all ages, is this series called Owly that I am like so obsessed with because it's like, it's so well done. So there are very few words in this book at all. It's about this adventure, the adventures of this little owl who lives in the woods. And I get kind of an Eeyore the vibe off of him because he's like, he gets like sad by things like, oh no, my friend went away. Where is he? And just has these huge eyes that all of a sudden have like this downcast turn, and you're just like, my baby. But like all the dialogue, like where there would be dialogue in this book, is like represented in kind of like pictures or exclamations. So I really like it because it's a way to kind of practice reading comprehension without necessarily knowing what the words are, which in some ways is kind of a more advanced skill, because instead of relying on words to tell you what's going on, you do have to be paying attention to the art and the representations. And, you know, if you've got a kid in your life who maybe doesn't quite pick up on like all the words, or maybe like really is attracted to animation because the faces are more stylized, so it's easier to read the emotions. I would say Owly is a good pick to kind of practice going through a story and following the emotional journey as opposed to just plot, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah, interesting. I've seen that book around, so yeah, that does seem like a good pick. So I know, Kait, you were excited to see that Nimona was on the list for a couple different age groups. So I'm not familiar with that book. So what's the sell there?
Nimona is kind of this meta book that is fantasy based. Man, it's hard to talk about. Like it's kind of, Nimona herself is the protagonist, and she's kind of an anti-hero. She shows up and she's all excited to help out the bad guy, and the bad guy is just in it for attention because he misses the guy who is the community hero, basically. So he does all these bad things to get his friend's attention, but they're not that bad. But Nimona comes along and she's like, let's explode the kingdom. And so she's a bad guy, but you're to understand that like these are not things that you're supposed to do in real life. So really it's just it's very cute, and then it will occasionally reference something that isn't like European fantasy, which is kind of the suggested setting. So it's this really kind of
quirky.
Yeah, it's just very quirky. It's very cute. And I love it, and I'm 30 years old, but it's definitely at the age range that definitely a high schooler, maybe even like 7th, 8th grade would understand and probably enjoy.
Yeah, I would say you can read it at the middle school level. You would get more of the nuance as a high schooler, depending on your social emotional development level. I read it when it came out when I was in like my mid to late 20s, and I vastly enjoyed it and was kind of like, where the hell was this when I was 15?
Interesting.
There is also an audiobook adaptation to it, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very sound produced, so there's a lot of extra little noises to it. But if you're trying to like have a themed gift for somebody, you could get them both the audiobook and the graphic novel.
Yeah, interesting.
Nimona is done by Noelle Stevenson, who is the creative force behind She-Ra and the Princesses of Power on Netflix.
Right.
And she also did, I think, my favorite Wonder Woman comic of all time, which was a one-shot in, is it Sensation Comics?
Yeah, the digital series they were doing a few years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sensation Comics. Noelle Stevenson did a Wonder Woman one-shot where Wonder Woman is maybe like middle school age and like shows up at Man's World, but like at a carnival boardwalk, and you just see her kind of like interacting with kids her own age in terms of like, oh, those boys are bullying someone. That's not cool. Let me play video games with these girls. Let me try ice cream. And it's just so wholesome while still capturing like who Wonder Woman is at the core of her character. So like I only have good things to say about Noelle Stevenson's work, and Nimona I think is the book that kind of put her on the map in terms of like people knowing who she was.
Oh, nice. And then I see on the list here also for high schoolers, you might recommend Young Avengers by the, Gillen and McKelvey tag team there.
Yeah. This is a book. So when I was in high school, my jam was Teen Titans, and I was reading the Jeff Johns run once I realized, like, because I was watching the TV show and then I was like, looking it up online, I was like, what do you mean this is based off of a comic book? And like, what do you mean they're putting this comic book in the stores still? So that's how I found it in my comic shop. And so I was reading that and being like, these guys are teenagers and I'm teenager. So that's how that works, right? But I like, again, like in my mid-20s, I read the Young Avengers run that Gillen and McKelvey did. And I was like, oh, this has like nuance that was maybe missing in the other one that I was reading. So I think if you want to give a high school reader something that might be like feel a little bit more on their level, I would say Young Avengers. And then you could be like, the cool aunt or uncle who is like, I get you. You can talk to me about stuff. It's fine.
I feel like another one for a high schooler might be Runaways, both the original run and today's run.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good pick.
It's got that, like, everybody's in high school, as far as I remember, except for little Molly. And it's kind of like you're in high school, you're kind of becoming who you're going to be as an adult. You're maybe, like, not necessarily rebelling, but at least questioning everything around you. And with Runaways being our parents are evil, oh, but wait, there was a reason all along. It's really, I feel like it would have really spoken to me in high school.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. That's a good pick. Yeah.
And then if like people are in college, like all I can think of is Neil Gaiman stuff, because I feel like when I was in college, literally everyone who was like, I work in a comic shop or I read comics was like, what do you mean you haven't read Sandman yet?
Yeah.
So...
Well, I still haven't read it, so
neither have I. And I feel like it's because people were pushing it so hard. They're like, you gotta read Sandman. You gotta read Sandman. I'm like, I hear you, but also you're the people who keep telling me that Watchmen is the end all be all. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
so yeah. So I was thinking about that, and I was trying to remember my college experience. It's kind of when I got back into reading comics, like more full time was when I was in college, and I think it actually was reading Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is kind of like, I think, a good book. Yeah, it's a good book to kind of say, like, it is a comic, but it also explains the theory. You can kind of gauge on a deeper level. It might rekindle your love for comics like it did for me. That is also where I'd recommend something like Love and Rockets by Jaime Hernandez, or even some like Harvey Pekar, American Splendor stuff. If you're a cynical college student, that's the stuff to read right there. So it's more along the lines of some alternative comics that might be more literary, whatever that term means, in style. So yeah, if you're a pretentious college kid like I was, that's definitely going to appeal to you.
Basically, ask yourself, would this be reviewed in the New Yorker magazine?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, that was my jam. So, so yeah, I think that's a good look there. But obviously, we have younger relatives. What about our older relatives? What are our parents that might not read comics? We have ideas what we'd get them, and keep in mind that all parents are different. We're not trying to put them all in the same basket, so to speak.
I know, like I really do hate lists like that. It's like gifts for her. Like, man, I hate to bring it up, but I'm gonna bring it up. That Peloton ad that everyone's flipping out on. Like, don't don't get your lady significant other an exercise machine without knowing that it's something that she's actually explicitly asked you for. But like, so when they're just like, look, this is a gift you could get your lady friend. I'm like, ooh, but what if she's like not into that? Like, think about them as a person. But I did want to kind of discuss, like, if you could make your parents like read a comic or reconsider a comic, like what might that be for you?
The first thing that sprung to mind for me, and it's actually a book I've actually already talked about my dad with, is Berlin by Jason Lutes, which was recently collected as a really nice hardcover, I think late last year. And that is if your father or someone is very into European history, particularly World War II history, this is a great book because it's all about pre-World War II Berlin, sort of like the 1920s into the 30s, when the city is a metropolitan scene. There's art, jazz. There's a sort of a libertine underground culture with cabaret. At the same time, you have political battles between the socialists and the Nazis. It's based on real history. It's beautifully illustrated. It's beautifully told. And it's a really amazing piece of historical fiction that I think a lot of fathers might be into that stuff. That might appeal to them.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off you there because I also picked a World War related book for my for my dad. And I actually think I'm cheating a little bit because I don't know if you'd necessarily put this in the comic book category or like the illustrated scroll category. It's called The Great War by Joe Sacco, and this book came out a few years ago. I remember seeing it in bookshops and being like, that looks interesting, and then not actually getting, because I was like, my dad won't read it. But it's actually this like 24-foot long pullout book where it's like a continuous illustration about World War One.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So it's like if not necessarily your father, but if someone in your life is into like the history of war and you think they might like a different way of looking at that, perhaps this pull out visual narrative that is like, I didn't get it, but I saw like sample pages and the art is really striking.
Interesting.
When I think of what do I get for my dad, I kind of jump to Westerns or sci-fi, and Copperhead would be great for that. So if your dad is open to fiction and likes Westerns and sci-fi, Copperhead was a great book.
Yeah, I went with Great War for this pick because I was like, look, Dad, you don't even have to read it. You can just pull out the things. And like my dad does read a lot, but whenever I try to give him comics, he just like kind of glances at it and then I think forgets about it. But if he actually was going to read it, then I would probably get him a stack of the James Bond comics that Dynamite has been putting out because those are actually great. Like, I don't know if you guys have been reading those at all, but every time I read one, I am pleasantly surprised by how good it is.
Interesting. That's a huge blank spot in my pop culture knowledge is James Bond, so that might be a place to start. But I also say, like, maybe your dad read comics when he was a kid, so maybe find out what he read. There's all sorts of trade collections of Silver Age and Bronze Age comics. You can probably get them. A few years ago, I did get my dad a collection of Silver Age Justice League comics, and he loved it because it's a trip down memory lane. So that's also a good thing to think about in that regard. What about our moms? Moms like comics too. We have some picks here. I think a lot of moms like to cook. I don't want to generalize but that's something. And I was thinking
moms
about that.
Dads,
and
Paul. Moms or
exactly.
dads.
I'm saying I cook. I'm not trying to be too specific here, but. My mom also loves a good recipe, and I think the book Relish, My Life in the Kitchen by Lucy Knisely is a fantastic book because it's a cookbook and a comic. It's about her remembering specific memories and childhood events based around the sensation of eating and like how taste and smell can trigger memories and growing up around food and appreciating food. It's also filled with a bunch of recipes that are illustrated that you can make. So it's a double function book. It's a memoir and a cookbook all in one. So that's a good pick for anyone that likes to spend time in the kitchen.
Gonna add that to the list for my brother. Thank you, Paul.
No problem. No problem.
This episode is great for my shopping. For my mom, my first reaction was actually a comic that I think as of now is still only available in French. And I was like, damn it, why doesn't my mom know French? It's this series called MAMETTE. And there's like a sort of a prequel series for it called Petite MAMETTE, like Little MAMETTE. So the series MAMETTE is about this like adorable old lady just kind of like going about her life being an old French lady. And then the series Petite MAMETTE is like you're seeing her story from when she was like a child, living with some more extended family members. They kind of allude to like other stuff going on in the background of France, but like she's safe in the countryside, like pre-electricity situation. I think it's like an earlier 20th century, like maybe World War I or World War II situation, probably World War II. And it's such a beautiful story. Like I wish they translated it into English because I remember like reading the Petite MAMETTE series and like crying because it's like you're following the story of this little girl, but you're seeing the things that are going over her head also because you see her like aunt and uncle and like other relatives kind of like talking above her head and she's like going off into the woods like la la la, but from their like glances or like they'll even devote panels to the adults reacting to what they just heard or learned about, and it's like pretty heartbreaking to read, but in like a beautiful, cathartic way. And so I was just like, ooh, my mom would love this if only she read French or if it was in English. So I was like, okay, all right, Carrie, you gotta pick something in English. So then I thought of the book Lulu Anew, which I read, God, probably like 6 years ago at this point. It is I forget if it's a French or just from another European country comic translated into English about this middle-aged woman who just like decides to not go home one day. And she ends up like walking along the beach for like miles and miles and like goes to a different town and talks to strangers and does all these things that have just not been a part of her routine of being wife and mother for the last like 20 years of her life. And it's really striking. Like, if you, like, I don't know if you'd necessarily give this to someone who's going through a midlife crisis or if it would help them, but like, I just felt this release while reading it of like, oh, like, what would happen if you just kind of left everything you knew and all your routines, if only for like a day?
Right. Huh.
I thought about Lulu Anew For like my grandmother also, because my grandmother at least is she still has wanderlust, still likes to travel and things like that. So I felt like Lulu Anew would be a really great pick for her, and I could see her sitting down to actually read this. I mean, I feel like it's not very wordy, but the art is really good. So if you've got somebody, if your older female relative has bad eyesight or something like that, this would still be a decent book for them.
I'll make a note of that. That's a good suggestion. So there's a few other, again, we have a very long list. We're not going to get to all of it, but I do want to make a special note that we probably have people in our lives that used to read comics and maybe stopped. So we have lapsed DC fans, lapsed Marvel fans. There's so many great books out there they might not know about. So what would we recommend for like a lapsed DC reader that we want to get back in the game, so to speak?
Well, I guess it's not so much back in the game as like, I even think I'm a good example of this. Like, you love the DC characters, but you've kind of fallen off reading everything month to month, and there have been so many changes to that universe that you're just kind of like, do I still recognize what's happening? Do I need to know continuity? And sometimes you just want a story that's like, what about the characters that I love? What if I just want to read like a story with them that I don't really have to worry about the rest of it?
Yeah.
And that's where Mr. Miracle comes in. And like, you listeners to the show, you know, we've talked about this at length, but like, really, if you have someone in your life who like used to read DC and for whatever reason hasn't read Mr. Miracle yet, the series that was published this past year, you got to get them the trade. I finally got around to reading it. Do I understand it? No. Is it great? Yes. Will I reread it? Probably. Like, if you at all like the New Gods or just even Mr. Miracle and Big Barda, even if you just like Big Barda, like I was in this for Barda, it's like it's such a healthy representation of a married couple. Like, I'm almost stunned that this book came out of a big two company, if I'm being totally honest.
You know, it's a very good book. And as someone that's already a huge Jack Kirby New Gods fan, I knew I was going to like it. But I'm heartened to hear that people that maybe aren't that familiar with the New Gods stuff were still able to find something in it that spoke to them. So, yeah, I would recommend that. If you have fans that maybe don't know those specific characters and have been out of the game for a while, I would say The New Frontier by Darwin Cook is a great book to give someone that's a DC fan.
So good.
Who maybe hasn't read that. So that's the classic characters in a way they would recognize. It's very a celebration of the Silver Age. It's a fantastic book, and it looks amazing.
It does look amazing. God, I love that book so much.
I just saw it on my shelf. I'm like, I have to reread that. I haven't read it in a while. So, for Marvel fans, again, I'm not as big of a Marvel reader, so I might not be the best person to suggest, but the book that got me, a recent book that got me reading Marvel stuff regularly, it was The Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing, written by Al Ewing with, of course, I'm blanking on the artist's name, and I feel terrible about that. But that's a book. Yeah, you know who it is. That's a book that, as someone that likes the Hulk in theory, but maybe not in practice, I immediately gravitated toward that book and thought it was fantastic. So someone that is familiar with Marvel stuff, but maybe is not reading contemporary stuff, that's an easy one to jump onto, I think.
That just makes me think of Hulk Grey.
Okay,
from a few years ago. Like, I read that because I feel like the Hulk is kind of like Wonder Woman. There's no real, like, this is the series that you must read for this character that, like, defines them in the way that, like, you know, you think, okay, Batman, Dark Knight stuff, and, like, Superman, like Death of Superman, or things like that. There's more, like, series that were, like, I can point to that and be like, that big thing that they did. But the Hulk and Wonder Woman, I feel like not so much, but like there's stuff that people say, but what about that one? But what about that one? And like this origin story. And I feel like because Hulk Grey was a revisitation of Bruce Banner and the Hulk's origin story, but done by contemporary writers and artists, but still with like a retro vibe that does kind of remind me of DC's New Frontier. Like, that for me was great because I didn't really know anything about the Hulk beyond like Hulk Smash, and I was like, oh, you sweetie, this is like Frankenstein updated.
And that's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, I think, right, on that book. Yeah, and the Immortal Hulk, it's Joe Bennett, of course, on pencils. I just remembered. So yes, check that book out.
Yeah, for Marvel stuff, for me, the stuff that I really like is their like more recent, like bubbly, colorful, unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Miss Marvel, this like the stuff like that. And then if for some reason you have someone in your life who used to read a lot of Marvel and for whatever reason did not read the Fraction Hawkeye, you should probably just get them volume 1 of Hawkeye.
That's a good pick too. And yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of lapsed X-Men fans, and I think there should be, if Marvel's smart, a Hox Pox collection out before Christmas.
It is coming out before Christmas,
too, of course.
Because I'm like, basically all of comics Twitter is like Hox Pox, and I'm like, what disease is this that you're all about? Like, what happened?
Right, yeah.
What new con crud nonsense is this? But it is an X-Men series that everyone is like, holy shit, this is the best. So even though I'm not really a devoted X fan, I am like, okay, publish Hoxpox, I will get it from the library, I will read it, and then I can be like, holy shit, you guys were right, or like, there will be no middle ground.
I will say, as a very skeptical X-Men fan, never been a big X-Men fan, I bought all of those issues, and I actually really loved all of them. So yeah, I'll endorse Hoxpox as a X-Men newbie, so to speak.
Paul, what's the full name so it doesn't sound like we're just talking in code without diseases?
It's House of X, Powers of 10. So yeah, you can find it at your local comic shop. I think the collection should be both those series
together,
presented narratively, how it's supposed to be read. So yeah.
Cool.
I'll give that a thumbs up. Kait, do you have any? I know you're not a big 2 reader. Do you have any insight here, or should we jump to another topic?
I'm just going to double down on the Runaways is great.
Okay. Yeah.
Also for
Good
new
pick,
readers.
Yeah, I think the trick here is books that aren't leaden down with continuity, and those are sometimes tough to find. But I think that might be a good pick.
It can be done.
So, yes. I want to very quickly talk about Star Wars. I know you've already mentioned a bunch of Star Wars books, Kara, as suggestions. I want to say maybe there's someone that likes Star Wars, but maybe has already consumed all the extra media or only likes the movies. I would say maybe give them Outer Darkness, the Image series that John Layman writes with art by Afu Chan. I picked that up on Hoopla on a whim, and it's great. It's a sort of that same space western vibe, space opera, but there is elements of magic involved. There's these spaceships that are powered by ancient gods that are no longer being worshipped, so they use their energy of the god to power the ships. It's a weird mix of magic and sci-fi that probably appeal to a lot of Star Wars fans, and the artwork is lovely. So that might be a good alternative gift to the sci-fi or Star Wars fan in your life.
That does appeal to me. Thank you. I will add that to my list for myself.
This is kind of a self-serving episode in a lot of ways, I think.
This is very much making my life easier in so many ways.
Is there any, I'm trying to think what else we have here on the list. Again, we will post this full list of suggestions on the website because there's no way we can get through all of this in the time allotted.
I wanted to talk about a couple series that I read once a long time ago, or actually I read Prez twice, so that's not fair. But I read these books and they just kind of stick in my mind, even if I'm not, just they'll rise up unbidden because other things remind me of them. For your friend who can't turn off C-SPAN, probably the book Prez from DC, somewhere in the 2015 through 2017 time frame. They revisited a series that they had done in the 70s where the premise is a teenager is elected president. But the update that they did in the late 2010s is superb. It's a short series. It's about this teenager nicknamed Corn Dog Girl who goes viral on social media and is then elected president. And it's very near future dystopian corporations are just personified logos who are really controlling the government kind of situation. But everything feels close enough where you're like, ah, fuck, that's probably what's going to happen. Like, if you like Black Mirror or politics or like following the political nonsense that's happening these days, you would probably find Prez at least a thought-provoking read. And then sort of on a dovetail to this topic, if you think Silicon Valley companies are evil and like the internet is maybe not like the internet is a tool and it's just what people do with it that becomes like good or bad. But like, God, probably like 6 or 7 years ago now, Boom, I think it was, did a series called Memetic. And that book is horrifying, man. It's like the premise is this like sloth meme goes viral, but is like a mind control device. And the ending, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it's way creepier than anything you're thinking of. And I almost threw up. So like I don't always have a physical reaction to comics, but like even just thinking about the last few pages of Memetic just make me be like, and not even just like from a gross out perspective, from a like, we really all think very close-mindedly about things even when we don't realize it. And it just, if you want to like feel a little uncomfortable about life, you should probably read Memetic or give it to someone who's just like telling you that they're canceling all their subscriptions to everything because Google's watching.
Okay. Interesting. I will cautiously put that one on the list. Speaking of, current events and, political stuff, I want to quickly recommend Rolling Blackouts by Sarah Glidden. This came out, I think, 2 years ago. It's a sort of memoir. It's a nonfiction comic, and Sarah Glidden basically doing a memoir about, maybe not a memoir is not the right word, but sort of a journalistic sort of approach to going to Turkey, Syria, and Iran. And she's with a group of journalists who are covering the refugee crisis there. And the book raises a lot of issues of what's the responsibility of a journalist? Can they tell a story objectively? Is it opportunistic to tell a story objectively? Are they being biased? It's a meditation on news coverage in the wake of a very real, sadly, humanitarian crisis that's happening there with the refugees. It's a somewhat depressing topic, but the way Glidden addresses it, I think is really eye-opening, and someone that might be in tune with that stuff would really appreciate that approach to it. So add that to the list.
And we have done so. Our full list will be in our notes because, like Paul said, there's just so much. Because we basically started this episode being like, I don't know, what do we recommend? And now we're like, what don't we recommend? Let's break it down, friends.
Yeah. I think the sort of the main takeaway here is that there's a comic out there for everyone. That's kind of what I tell people when they ask me what comics I like or what they should check out. I say, look, just go to your local shop. There's going to be something that's going to speak to you either artistically or thematically, and that's your entry point. It's not just superheroes. Obviously, we know that, but a lot of people still think that way. So being able to find something that you think is going to speak to someone on your list, as I mentioned earlier, that does show some initiative, and it is a nice way to introduce them to this wacky world of comics that we love. So I feel like we are getting toward the end here. Do we want any last wrap-up recommendations before we wrap it up here? Anything you're dying to recommend that's on the list?
Don't forget all of the old newsprint comics like Calvin and Hobbes.
Yes.
For somebody who likes the retro stuff or an older relative.
Oh, yeah.
I would even say Calvin Hobbes for your younger readers, maybe kids that didn't read it when it was being published. Those books are still great for kids. Like I remember being so excited every Sunday to read the big Calvin Hobbes that was on the front of the comics page every Sunday. So that's a nice trip down memory lane for people our age, and also for younger readers. They would still, I think, be into that stuff. So that's a great recommendation across the board.
I really put Calvin and Hobbes in the same category as the early Peanut stuff from Charles Schultz, because like the early Peanut stuff was a strip like about, and I guess for children, but really speaking to adults also. And Schultz was really really biblical and philosophical in his early work in the 50s and 60s with Charlie Brown and the gang, just like straight up philosophizing. And like Schroeder was playing Beethoven. What 6-year-old plays Beethoven? But
Right, yeah.
Calvin and Hobbes I kind of put in that tradition because Calvin and Hobbes are named after philosophers, and
Right.
a lot of the day-to-day comic strips were about some more like childish fun and fantasy and whatever worlds are made, like Calvin Ball. But especially in a lot of the Sunday strips that you were talking about looking forward to,
Yeah.
like sometimes those strips would just be like Calvin and Hobbes riding in a wagon down a hill while straight up philosophizing to one another. So I totally agree with you that Calvin and Hobbes is like all ages. Like I guess my short list then is like, when in doubt, give someone Calvin and Hobbes.
That's a solid recommendation. I secondhand endorse that. So yeah, that's great. And maybe there's one here I did notice on the list for the person on our list that we wish read comics. Would be our book to say, hey, I know you're not into comics. This might be the one that converts you. We have some good picks here. So I already mentioned Runaways. I think somebody put that there. And then what else do we have?
So
I Kill
Runaways
Giants.
is Runaways is the book that got me reading comics, but I Kill Giants is the book that kept me reading comics, because it meant there was more than just your team superhero books. Like, it could be about one girl dealing with her personal demons.
I read that book recently for the first time, and
Oh, no.
I did cry.
Yep. Every time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good pick. I Kill Giants. I threw Paper Girls on that list just because I think that's a book that has a sort of universal appeal, and I think it's a really engaging story. That's a book that no one's going to just end with the first volume. They're going to want the next one. So that's a very addictive pick to get someone hooked on buying comics, I think.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Cool. Well, we will post, as we said, the full list on our site here, which you can find. And if you have any suggestions that maybe we missed, we'd love to hear from you. You know where to find us. We are on the internet, all over Twitter. Kara is at KSZam. I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. Kait is at Kait L. Fear. I am at Oh Hi Polly, and the show is at IRCB Podcast. We post comic book news, art we like, sassy comments, and a whole lot more.
This show is powered by fans like you on Patreon. Find our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Join us now for access to exclusive audio articles, previews of the IRCB schedule, early access to top of my pile posts, and more. Our Goodreads group is a lovely community of comic friends. You can join our yearly reading challenge and comment on our weekly threads. This week's thread was holiday-themed comics. Check it out at ircbpodcast.com/goodreads.
Head over to irsbpodcast.com for our pronunciation guide, Discord server, zines, merchandise, and everything else IRCB. If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on iTunes and beyond, and we'll read your review on the next episode. Email the show with what you've been reading, recipes, corrections, whatever, at ircbpodcast@gmail.com.
Infinity Shred are the best band in the world. They also do the music for our show. Xander is a wizard. He's behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz. He also edits the show. I want to say thank you to Kait and Kara for joining me on this episode. It was a really fun topic. Thank you for listening. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.
Good work, friends.
I think we did a great job. I'm really proud of us.
I was really excited about my comic picks too, and then as I was about to start being like, let me tell you about the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, but it came out last week and I didn't see that until I was actually on the detail page for the item.
I
was very excited to hear you geek out about it, though. I'm disappointed that I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll do it in brief for you right now. Basically, like, what ridiculous names for teams? Obviously, I want to read this thing that probably exceeded your Twitter limit just through the title.
I'm very curiously, have you watched any of that the Netflix show, the Toys That Made Us? because there's an episode about both of those.
That sounds right up my alley. I have not seen that yet.
It's worth checking out. I haven't watched every episode. I've just basically watched the episodes about toys that I actually had as a kid. But what's great is the Ninja Turtles one, the first 10 minutes of the episode is just Kevin Eastman and whatever Laird, the guys who created just them geeking about Jack Kirby for 10 minutes and how much they love Jack Kirby. And it's how they became friends is that they love Jack Kirby together. And it's great. So.
Oh, that's adorable. I thought about leaving my bed to go do the next phase of laundry. And then I thought, no, why would I do that thing?
Do you hang your laundry outside? Is that why you need it to be nice?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
Because not always, there is a dryer, but I do have, today was a day that I needed to wash jeans, and I just, recently read so I got a lot of my nerdiness from my dad, but he, goes through phases where he either really embraces being a nerd or is just no, I'm cool. But he, is having a nerdy moment about, Japanese selvage denim from Brooks Brothers.
Huh.
And he's got, one pair of this really nice denim jeans, and he, read up on how to take care of them, and he's like, Kara, you cannot put denim in the dryer. It ruins the elastic fibers. So now I'm, hang drying my jeans, and then I also had to hand wash a few sweaters. So those are out hanging. And yesterday it was raining all day, but that didn't really matter because I was out of the house the whole time. But I was like, okay, I really need to do laundry today. And this morning it was cloudy and rainy. But then the sun came out around noon. So I was like, laundry time. And this is how I knew I was a grown-up. That's how I know I'm a grown-up. When I'm excited that I'm able to do laundry in the manner to which I'm accustomed, if the gas prices are less than $4 a gallon and I have a favorite grocery store. It's Trader Joe's.
Yeah, I get that. So.